So welcome. As many of you know, my name is Cecilia Orphan, and I'm an assistant professor of higher education at the Morgridge College of Education, and I want to welcome you formally to the second annual Higher Education Lecture Series. We are so pleased that so many people showed up on an early Tuesday morning, but even more excited that Jonathan Butler is here with us today for a conversation entitled Race, Identity, and Freedom. So before we get started, I wanted to take this opportunity to thank our co-sponsors. We had a lot of generous support from across the university. So we were fortunate to receive co-sponsorships from the Center for Community Engagement and Service Learning, the Latino Center for Community Engagement and Scholarship, and the following Morgridge academic departments: Child, Family, and School Psychology, Counseling Psychology, and Research Methods and Information Sciences. And I also want to let you know that we have a hashtag for the event, so if you are on Twitter and you like to tweet these types of things, it is DUHED Butler, BUTLER. And I didn't see anyone writing that down, so yay! Okay, so once again, DUHED Butler. So before I turn it over to Mr. Butler, I just wanted to offer a little bit of background remarks. And really, as many of you know, since the University of Missouri student protests in the fall, the Higher Education Department here at DU, in partnership with a number of other departments within the college, have taken this opportunity to host a year-long conversation about campus, racial climate, and equity. And these conversations were kicked off by a fall meeting with higher education students and faculty. How many people were at that meeting right after? Right, so you remember that meeting. And as we were talking and students were sharing their insights about campus racial climate here at DU and their reactions to the events at Mizzou, I pushed students to think about what happens after the protests, what comes next. What specific things did they want to see happen here at DU and on campuses across the country? And my thinking was, protests are incredibly important, but students need to let administrations know the tangible changes they want to see happen. Then 3 days later, I was in Boston for a research colloquium. And during a reception as part of the colloquium, I was talking to a graduate student from Brandeis University who had led similar protests on her campus regarding campus racial climate. And I did the same thing I did with her that I did with you all. I said, what are the tangible things that you want to see happen? What will happen? What do you want the administration to do in response to your protests? And she said to me, with all due respect, that's not my job. It's the faculty's job to work with us and the administration to address racial climate. And I gotta tell you, if there was a teachable moment that I've experienced, that was like a bolt of lightning. And so I immediately reflected on the advice I gave you all. And I realized student protests and organizing have been incredibly important shapers of campus racial equity. And students have amazing ideas about how to make things better, but students must also have the support of the faculty and administration to drive change. We can't rely solely on student labor and energy to create inclusive campuses. And as Mr. Butler said yesterday, we can't ignore the toll that activism takes on students. So I realized that it's my responsibility as a faculty member to ensure that I am pushing our college campus to be more racially inclusive, and to be sure that I'm constantly interrogating my own research, service, and teaching to figure out how I can promote racial equity and other forms of equity. So part of taking responsibility and taking personal campus racial climate is to leverage events like this to continue the conversation and organizing around these issues. So that's why Jonathan Butler is here today. And as many of you know, he's a graduate student in educational leadership and policy analysis at the University of Missouri. His emphasis area is higher education. And I learned yesterday from talking to him that his activism started at the age of 9. So some of us are a little bit later to the game. Jonathan's been at this for a while. And he was the founding member of Concerned Students 1950, a student collective at Mizzou that addresses racism and discrimination on campus. And he made headlines, as we all know, in the fall of 2015 for initiating a hunger strike to protest racism on his campus. I'll also note that Mr. Butler has a bachelor's in business, but he came over to our side on education, and we're glad he did that. And then I also want to celebrate that at 3:23 yesterday morning, he turned in his capstone project for his master's. So, congratulations to that. And that looked at undocumented immigrants and globalization. So he's quite the scholar. And then, as many of you know, Dr. Cross will actually have a conversation with him after he gives about 10 to 15 minutes of framing remarks. And I know many of you know him, but those who don't, Dr. Cross is a leading theorist of research in the field of ethnic identity development, and specifically Black identity development. And he was a leader in the Black consciousness movement, among other organizing and activism he's done throughout the years. So if ever there was a conversation I wanted to be a fly on the wall for, this is it. So without further delay, I'll turn it over to Mr. Butler.
How's everybody doing today? Good. Wonderful. It's the obligatory age of millennials, right? And so I have to ask, is it okay if I snap this moment, right? I'm going to get quick. We're going to use the hashtag. So if you guys are all right, we're going to get it. So everybody ready? Everybody excited? Okay. 1, 2, 3. All right, there we go. All right, awesome. An absolute pleasure to be here. Absolute blessing to be alive and be in this space. As the late mogul icon Prince Rogers once told us, dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to get through this thing called life. And so, not quite, the scholar on framing remarks, but I'm going to give a little bit of backdrop of why I chose the title of Race, Identity, and Freedom. And then we're going to get into some conversations. My one call to action for today is that I love active audiences, so please ask some hard questions, be thinking of them, just be engaged. Let's be present in this space. I think if we do nothing else with the time that we have here, let's value that we have this time with each other, and let's be present in the moment. So, looking at why I chose race, identity, and freedom. Namely because, contrary to a lot of belief, and a lot of people laugh at me when I say this, but for the longest, I actually didn't know that I was Black. And I say that because I grew up in the Midwest in Omaha, Nebraska. Anybody? Nobody? Nebraska? Thank you. Yes. And being from Omaha, Nebraska, I grew up in North Omaha. North Omaha being primarily populated by Blacks and Latinos. My lived experience, based on the way that I grew up around my mother and those who raised me, was just simple things, simple nuances that I really didn't realize were shaping who I was. That I grew up around only Black individuals. We went to primarily Black schools, including up to high school. I noticed this weird phenomenon in which around 6 p.m., as the sun was starting to go down, my mother would always call me inside from wherever I was, or she would make sure that I was home, or she'd make sure that I was on one part of the city, on one side of Dodge Street or not, making sure that I was taken care of and around people who look like me. And so, although there's incidences I faced growing up, my Blackness wasn't really developed, or I really didn't grow into that identity until I came to college. Because when we looked at college, I was faced with a lot of things. Beyond Blackness, one of the primary things I was faced with was the idea that not everyone's Christian. And that was really hard for me because I grew up in a very strict Christian household. The Black church, there are ideals that we have and hold true and hold steady to. And there are things that are interesting that go on with the church. So when we look at how patriarchy functions, when we look how sexism functions, we look how homophobia functions in the Black church. I grew up with these ideals of how everyone in the world should be operating, and if you don't operate in that vein, you're going to hell and you're wrong. I quickly had to understand the reality that that's not how the world works. Being at the University of Missouri, being at a primarily and historically white institute, I was faced with a lot of different challenges. Within the first 2 weeks of me being on campus at the University of Missouri, I had the N-word written on my door in the engineering hall. I started off as an engineering major. Yeah, a little bit about that. Engineering major, didn't like it, had some incidences, went to psychology, didn't like it, went to sociology, and then my scholarship was about to run out, so I chose business. Yeah, my mom said I had to graduate. So, but being involved in those incidents, so very early on, I was faced with this reality. Is like, wow, I'm black, and like I'm treated in a very specific way based on that identity. I think also to the incidents I had when President Obama had not only come to the University of Missouri, but then when he was elected, there are 3 drunk white individuals who approached me in my residence hall and then jumped me and proceeded to beat me up until I had another white colleague intervene and assist me in that. Because in words like me, and there are other words that I'm not going to use in this space that they had in that conversation, but in words like me didn't deserve to run the country. I've also had incidences where I had a very dear friend of mine who was an athlete, who was a women athlete at the University of Missouri, who went through an incident of sexual assault. Being an athlete, the incident was occurred from another fellow athlete. That fellow athlete was in a revenue-generating sport, bringing in dollars to the university, and because of that, they were not persecuted for the act. They were not investigated of any sort, and she had made numerous claims, her and her family, for over a year and a half. And university officials not only did not listen to her, but silenced her and then also took away her scholarship. As a part of that, after dealing with that battle for a year and a half, her mental health began to age and she ended up taking her own life, unfortunately. We had 2010 at the university, we had cotton ball incident where cotton balls, I think it was 1,000 cotton balls or something like that, maybe exaggerating the number, were thrown on our Black Cultural Center's front lawn. Again, the young gentlemen were given community service because they were just goofing off or they were under the influence. But in their testimonies, both of the young white men who committed the act admitted that they wanted to see the Black cultural staff, who are all African American, pick cotton like the old days. And that was the exact quote from those individuals. So as I've understood what my blackness means at a PWI, what my blackness means in society, I've grown and developed to understand that I exist in a hostility every single day that I don't get to escape. I don't get to scrub the skin off. I don't get to escape my reality. But even within that reality, there are ways that I can continue to resist the systems that are in place and then help build resistance within others. So really looking at the idea of what it means to resist. And a big part of that came through activism. And as I told the group, and that's a longer story that we don't have time for it, I started at the age of 9 in activism. Activism being this idea of civic engagement, right? Not necessarily just protest, which y'all often lean to, but this idea of civic engagement. It started at the age of 9. Again, going back to my church days, obviously we had, we did a lot of work with food pantries, we did work in prison ministries. I started around that time, 9, 10. But what was most notable to me is that my bunk beds, I had to give them away to a refugee family that had recently come to Omaha. So really being involved in activism and being surrounded by a culture of individuals who are loving and caring and showing how you can have compassion for people who don't look like you. And so how does that manifest to where we are right now? A lot of things. Obviously, we can name Troy Davis, we can name Trayvon Martin, we can name Maya Hall, we can name a lot of different situations. But for me, the way that I became mobilized and more radicalized in my idea of how to be involved in the movement at large in activism, really what happened in Ferguson. Rick, show of hands, because again, I also want to be careful, who's familiar with Ferguson, Mike Brown? All right, wonderful. So you guys have the general consensus of what occurred. And so for me, Troy Davis wasn't real. What happened with Trayvon Martin wasn't real, right? The things I saw on TV, saw on Fox News, CNN, but they weren't real. I couldn't touch them. It wasn't a tactile experience for me. But being that Ferguson was an hour and a half away, and also being with the incident in Baltimore, having family in that area, those things were tangible. I had people who were directly impacted by it. I always think back to the incident on 9/11, that I have family in New York, and that was real for me. Other situations weren't real for me, but it didn't happen until August of 2014, that knowing that I can drive an hour and a half. And originally it was out of anger and out of curiosity. But through that, born of working through organizations like Millennial Activists United, the Organization for Black Struggle, and the list goes on, I was able to be exposed to a different type of activism. I was exposed to the idea of mobilizing individuals, not mobilizing bodies, but mobilizing stories, mobilizing the lived experiences of people, and using that mobilization to affect change on not just, hey, we want this person fired or we want this XYZ change, but having the structural and institutionalized change to help impact these communities. And I think that's what often got lost in the narrative of Ferguson, and also what got lost in our narrative at the University of Missouri. Because it's so easy to paint on headlines, oh, it's a racial thing, or, they just want this cop fired. But if you actually look at the work that's being done by community organizers on the ground, there's a true push to address structural and systemic issues of racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, poverty, homelessness. The list goes on. Gentrification, which I've heard through conversations is occurring pretty rapidly in this area, and really understanding that if we want to address these issues, we have to stop talking about it. We have to stop discussing. We have to stop working towards them on such a surface level, but truly identify the factors, especially for the work I do in globalization, the global factors that impact this, right? Because they're not just things that happen at Mizzou. They're not just things that happen in Denver. They're not just things that happen in California and XYZ. These are things that we're dealing across the world. And if we truly don't combine our forces, combine our knowledge, and combine the work that we're doing in our global community, when we look at the intersection of not just, maybe being, a person of color and then also identifying as queer, or maybe also identifying as a certain class status. That's the intersectionality in the terms that in the ways that we operationalize it right now. But if we truly understand intersectionality and understanding how we have intersectional struggles on a global level, I believe that's when we can start to truly and strategically address the issues that we're facing, and understanding that it's not just going to come down to firing XYZ cop at XYZ city. It's going to come down to addressing systems of oppression, systems of domination, addressing whiteness, addressing all these things that we're facing, because again, the reality is it's not just facing Black people. It's not just poor people. It's not just Latinos. It's not just the people of South Korea who are facing their own struggles. It's not the people in Yemen. It's not the people in Syria. It's everybody is impacted by these things, and we don't have the luxury, and we shouldn't feel comfortable in any type of luxury of being able to sit by while these things are going on. We should always be on the ready. We should always be armed to the teeth to be able to fight these issues, understanding that if something is happening to me, right, we always like to quote MLK, but injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere, and we truly have to identify and adopt that mentality and mantra for our lives. Framing remarks, I'm not really good at them, but I think I've had enough time of talking to you guys, so let's get to the conversation. I'm very curious. I'm very excited about what we can achieve in this time. Thank you.
Well, I wanted to start with a philosophical question. If we were in a Black barbershop or a beauty salon, we would hear the famous Black statement, "Is you a fool?" So I want to know, when you turned to your relatives in the Butler clan and you told them what you were going to do, and after someone in the back row said, "Is you a fool?" what did you say?
Oh, well, I'm definitely very adept to those conversations.
Okay.
Contrary to belief, I did have hair at one point in time. Back in the Afro cornrows phase, but y'all couldn't imagine me. I'm probably sure. But yeah, is you a fool? Yeah, from a lot of people, especially my own community. So there are people in my family who, again, coming from my child might die in a hunger strike, or there's a time where I had shotguns pointed to my face in Ferguson when I was doing some of the organizing there, and so that's scary for as my parents, as other individuals who are concerned about my life. But the issue of fool also comes from the idea of just a gap in education from a lot of people, or just this silencing effect that happens in society where people are scared to speak out. There's that culture of fear, that culture of silence, in which it's just better to just go with the status quo. It's better to work within the system. Just it'll be okay. A lot of times, especially in academia, it's like, just get your degree. Yeah. That's what you need to do in life. Get your degree, and then racism ends once you walk across the stage. And I've engaged people who truly have those philosophies, and so it really is trying to break down those barriers and truly educate people on the world we live in, and understand that it's not it's doom and gloom sometimes, but it's not all doom and gloom, and understanding that the central of what we have to do has to be one, love, and 2 has to be hope. If we don't have love and hope in the work we do, we're doomed to fail. So I think that, you know, it's okay to be called a fool. It's okay to have dissenting opinions and get in those heated arguments, those barbershop arguments, right? D-Wade, you know, LeBron, Kobe, you know, those heated debates. But also being realistic that we have to approach one another in love as we continue to struggle and tackle these tough issues.
So on Saturday, I had lunch with Relan Rabaka. He's a very prominent African-American scholar at Boulder. He's 40, and I think he has 12 books already. So his latest project is the music of the Civil Rights era. And I told him that I would be here talking to you. And we both wondered, what music did you listen to on the day? Were you listening to Lamar or Tupac? Or...
Well, Kendrick Lamar, we gonna be all right. Like the Pimp like for most people you interacted with during the past year, that's been like a mantra. That's been just a classic call to action. But for me, and a lot of people don't believe me, but I was listening to the following people: Hans Zimmer, who does musical scores. I was listening to Inception a lot, the Inception soundtrack. I was listening to Nina Simone. As well, prior to a lot of the controversy and things with her biopic. So I was listening to her, as well as I was listening to, and I don't know if people would be familiar with it, but Delphi 9, which is also a world music group. And so I have very interesting taste in music, but those are the people who are really resonating in terms of Delphi 9 does a lot of things about socially aware music in terms of like the Middle East. You have Nina Simone, who's just... It's Nina Simone. And then you also have like Hans Zimmer, where, you know, if I'm going hunger strike, I'm gonna have this anthem. I'm happy to have this music that's helping me charge forward. So yeah,
great. What about this experience has surprised yourself?
Do you want the table answer, or do you want the truth?
Oh, the truth.
Okay, the truth.
Because you're in higher ed, we have 3,000 assignments to self-reflect, and I was thinking to myself, and I was just curious, was there a moment when you kind of self-reflected and you even surprised yourself?
I mean, honestly, they're just surprising in terms of like how the mobilization of everyone functioned. Because understanding it was much more than Black student activists. Faculty, staff, community members, the faith community, all different backgrounds, identities of individuals. But I think what hits closer to home is just the realization that what we saw in terms of historically looking at the literature, looking at the greats of the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, other movements who dealt with infighting and dealt with betrayal and dealt with those issues. Because of the way we romanticize history, I was like, that doesn't happen. What? That's not real. Oh, that was just MLK and Malcolm. They're just palling around. But understanding that infighting happens to this day, and I was extremely surprised by just some of the responses. So how some people, you know, read like a media article about me and then believe it, and then they would no longer be my friend. Or there are certain individuals on campus who made it their life's campaign and still going strong to this day, you know, trying to get me out of the university. So I didn't realize that, you know, having that visibility and putting myself in the predicament, specifically a hunger strike, would result in, you know, I was a pretty well-liked guy. And so it was uncomfortable to be in a space where I was like public enemy number one. Yeah.
Time to have questions, right? Mm-hmm. So let's throw it open to the group. So. Yes.
My question for you is with regards to the critical hope that you're speaking of. So what helps you to maintain that critical hope to continue to move forward in the manner that you do with your activism?
Mm-hmm. Great question. I think first and foremost, it has to be tying it back to my faith. Although there's structural issues I have with the Black church, I'll never deny my faith and my love for God. And so that's always helped drive me, and always helped me understand. I was just telling Cecilia earlier this morning, is that, you know, it's hard to live in the world we live in. There's a lot of tragic things going on. I picked up the newspaper today. They're doing more bombings in Syria. You know, there's a lot of things going on. But the simple fact that, you know, in my worldview, we're all divinely created. So there has to be a little bit of good in at least everybody, right? So it keeps me hopeful, as well as just looking at the ideals of people like Ashad Shakur, who talks about we must love and support each other. Listening to those ideals, Alice Walker, who talks a lot about power, especially the empowerment of Black women and what we have to do to continue to empower this community that we're building, or that we should be building, right? And so looking at, you know, there are people who are doing some amazing things in this life, and to just solely focus on the bad in this world does a disservice to the life that we can live by looking at the realism that, you know, there's trouble, but there's also good things happening.
Evan?
Jonathan, how would you describe the campus climate at the school now? And the second part of that is, has the media coverage been on target, or what is your view on media coverage of everything?
Second question first. No. Has it been on target? Absolutely not. It's really deplorable is the word I want to use, but I'm gonna go with disappointing for this space, because granted there's the trending effect. So when everything was happening, the week of the hunger strike, then everybody just came, right? Washington Post, Huffington Post, CNN, everybody just came. But before that, even the local media attention, and if you know geographically, it's Kansas City. 2 hours away, it's Columbia, and then an hour and a half away, it's St. Louis. So we had Kansas City and St. Louis reporters as well. But the story, it became so sensationalized around Black people and around, oh, they all must be associated with Black Lives Matter, which was not the case. Everybody must be associated with, you know, they're trying to kill the president. You know, there's just story headlines that sold that didn't tell the true story, especially the story of community, understanding that I'm not in this space just because of a hunger strike. It really was a community body of work that had to go into it. So it's just been really disappointing to see that, you know, especially being at the school with the #1 journalism program in the nation, even we couldn't produce content that was objective in nature. But in terms of campus climate, do you want the table answer or do you want the truth? The truth is that, you know, I have a very unique experience, and so I always try and be very aware of that because I have been hyper visible this whole time. And because of that, I get flipped off at Walmart. Like, people curse me out on the street. Like, people like drive by on campus and still say things to me. So in a sense, I could be like, campus climate is horrible. But I do think when you look at the greater body at large, you know, 35,000 plus individuals on campus, I do think it's improving, very, very small margins. But I do think there are certain initiatives, especially like our diversity course that we're trying to implement for this upcoming year. So there's initiatives being put in place. Is it radically shifting the campus climate? No. But the leadership that we do have in place, I do think are making attempts at trying to put in things in place the best that they know how to make campus better.
Thank you.
Yes.
So I was talking to my advisor, who's actually sitting here, Cecilia, and she was mentioning that when you're making waves, essentially people aren't going to like you. You mentioned going from being a tremendously well-liked individual on campus to public enemy #1. At any time in that transition from being well-liked to public enemy #1, obviously probably some levels of discouragement probably came about. How did you deal with that discouragement that you were receiving from not only from your community but people from outside of it? How did you have the motivation to keep going?
That's a good question. Thank you. So that transition was really hard, right? Because I was in the system, but I didn't know I was in the system for the majority of my undergrad career. Because, again, I mentioned in my opening comments that Ferguson really radicalized me in my idea of activism and organizing. And that was true because there's a huge involvement culture at the University of Missouri. And so I was a part of that. I was on like 10 different executive boards. I was on like every chancellor's committee. I was in all the meetings. I was on a lot of different like spaces, especially spaces of power and whiteness. And I had access to those spaces because I was a safe individual. Like I was a person of color, but I was safe because, you know, I was abiding by the rules. I had my gold name tag, and I was a cool kid on the block. You know, just like everybody else who does like summer welcome and other orientation, things like that. But as soon as I made that shift to really focus more on the community and delve into some of, I guess, what you would consider unsafe activism, or more of the radical sense of activism trying to attack structural issues, that's when, you know, the shift happened. So it actually intensified during the hunger strike, but it started to transition as I got into my graduate program, because as we're learning these theories, we're learning critical race scholars, I'm just like, mind explodes. Because I was just exposed to a whole new thing. So that shift was so dramatic that happened in the fall that I really didn't have time to put insulation or buffers in place. Because previously, you know, I've always been able to lean on certain individuals and have that support network, but my village of support left me last fall, and I think that's what was different about any other changes I've had. And so it wasn't a good transition at all. It was a very dark time, dealing with a lot of mental health issues, going through depression. Because I didn't have any support, I was all on my own, and I won't go into other details beyond that, but understanding that a part of coming out of that were there were very key individuals who had helped me along the way, but primarily I also thought about my grandfather, who did a lot of work in New York. He was a defense attorney, and he really helped out the community, and his legacy, and I'm actually named after him, was also something that helped get me through, because I understood that, you know, what, you know, he fought for all of his life. I can't be a disappointment to the legacy that he set forth for me, especially since I am his namesake. And so, you know, it was those factors, and then also rebuilding that village and having rebuilding that sense of what accountability looks like. What was key for me to get through.
Yes.
Thank you, Jonathan, for coming. We talk a lot in our classes about mentors and the importance of having someone who keeps you grounded in a system of support in these systems we're trying to complicate. So I'm wondering if you had any mentors during that time. I think you spoke a little bit about it in the previous answer. And what was the advice, or what was beneficial about them that you kept salient to you during, you know, this entire activism movement?
I have active and passive mentors, which I think everyone should have. I think that's just a general model. So like passive mentors are people like Congressman John Lewis, who is also a fraternity brother of mine. Yes, Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated. Just want to put that out there. And so, you know, he gave me a lot of good life lessons. Also, just because we had the opportunity to connect of being both black males, being same fraternity, both being John Lewis, and also having similar identities in terms of the way we did activism, like his work in SNCC. And so, a lot of good rhetoric in terms of that intergenerational support. I also have like academic mentors as well. So I think of people like Dr. Amaya Dashe Gabrino, who just came to the university in 2014, right as everything was happening with Ferguson and Mike Brown. And so being one of two people of color, specifically women faculty of color in our education program, that was huge, because I was still trying to navigate. So she's been a great mentor. And then I also have like community mentors, tons of individuals back home in Nebraska who have been supportive. So, and as well the faith community. So it's important, but even then, some of those people had to change because of the way that they engage with activism, and their approach towards me changed because they didn't quite agree with activism. And so it's always been about like having the passive as well as the more intentional advisors and mentors in your life.
Yes.
Part of the solution right here, I think has to do with cross-fertilization. You know, Mizzou communicating with what's happening at Yale, what's happening at Ithaca, what's happening at Berkeley, and so I know that that's beginning to happen, but where does that need to go?
I mean, it's been happening, and we've been having conversations. We did a homecoming demonstration. By show of hands, who watched the Mizzou homecoming demonstration video? Okay. Who knows what I'm talking about when I say the homecoming demonstration? Okay. So a little bit of context. So a lot of things were going on. My experience I shared, I've experienced a lot of different things. I'm not the only person. A lot of campus climate issues were going on. And so we had talked to everybody, right? We had wrote letters. We had been in diversity forums. A lot of those diversity forums, like, we created and, like, scheduled ourselves. We had met with people behind closed doors, with the chancellors and different things. We sent out tweets. And so we just weren't getting a response back to our lived experience, because we're saying, like, no one's even trying to have a conversation with us about, like, how to move forward. They always want to hear about our trauma and pain and exploit us in that realm and really put us in a point of re-traumatizing ourselves, but no one actually wanted to push forward the narrative, like, okay, what are some things, like, one of the things we push forward, talk about being tangible, hate crime policy. We don't have a hate crime policy on campus, so when I talked about the Cotton Ball incident in 2010, those individuals, I think, got 20 to 30 hours of community service. Let alone the community service wasn't even like in a community of color. Like, I think they went to, like, the Veterans Association or something, and they were allowed to. I think they were suspended for, like, a couple weeks, and they came back. But if there's hate crime policy, like some institutes have, they they're not aligning with the values of the school, so they would have been gone. So I'm going somewhere, right? So a lot of incidents, and then what we tried to do is, like, okay, well, one person we haven't really had an interaction with is the university system president, because we have 4 campuses in our system. And so we're like, we couldn't get a hold of him. His administrative assistant went and set up an appointment. So we're like, you know what? We know where you're going to be in October, and that's at homecoming, because there's the Mizzou brags about being the inventors of homecoming, and so it's a big tradition on campus. And we know he has a car that's afloat. And so what we did is we put together a demonstration, not a protest. We put together a demonstration to educate him in that space about what's going on campus. A lot of things happened. Drunk individuals ended up coming towards us, pushing us physically. There's a lot of emotions. Campus police threatened us with arrest and pepper spray. We almost got run down by a car. It was just a whole bunch of stuff happening. So after that point, we were just like, yeah, we got to put some other things in motion. So when we talk about that point, that's when a lot of people knew about what was happening on campus, and we started talking specifically with the Irate 8 at the University of Cincinnati, who was doing a lot of work. We started talking to Ithaca. We started talking to a lot of different universities. But going from here, it has to be more strategic, right? But we also have to be aware of the big thing, which is capacity, because me burning out and not having time to take care of myself was the norm. That was normalized for activists. So when you see what's happening on campus, kind of going back to your question, the forefront of activism on campus has shifted because a lot of people have burnt out because they gave their all so much since 2014. And after 2 years' time, we have made some progress, but people are just kind of spent. And some people have withdrawn. They're not even completing their degrees. Other people have fallen behind the classes. There's a lot of different things. So you have to look at, yes, we need to be more strategic, create more networks. There's a great initiative from the Black Liberation Collective, who has been trying to connect the schools, the over 100 schools who have put out demands and do things like that. But it's also about capacity. The real, we're students. Like there should be accountability measures put in place for students to hold administrators, faculty, staff accountable, but it shouldn't come at the cost of me doing the job of someone who gets paid $500,000 a year.
Yes.
The list of demands that was created spurred other institutions to come up with their own list of demands. But I'm very curious of how you all, as concerned students, came up with these lists of demands. Did you, I'm assuming just based on reading them, they're thoroughly researched. There's a lot of information based on past history, and I know that there have been lists of demands before. But how has that informed that process? What did that look like, and how did you all kind of come to some sort of consensus to say these will be listed? These are our top priorities.
A couple things. A great resource, going back to Black Liberation Collective, they have a resource on their website. It's like blc.org or Black Liberation. You can Google it. But they have a great resource on demands that members of our group help create, in terms of how, why we call them demands, not requests. And what's the implications of calling something a request when you're an oppressed identity and you're in an environment that's oppressing you? So why we call them demands and the history of that, being highly informed by the work done by the Black Campus Movement, done by Abram Ingram, which talks a lot about the similar processes. So that's what we've done, and that's really a better sense of the process of how to create demands in terms of like understanding what do you want your outcomes to be, understanding the power of information. So have you like gone to your archives today? Have you like cited people who are already doing this work on your campus? So you're not just reinventing the wheel. Understanding the environment that you're in, understanding power dynamics as well. Like, okay, so you're protesting the chancellor, but the way your school is set up, the chancellor really doesn't have any power, so you need to go to X, Y, Z. Understanding those. But in the case of ours, it really wasn't that hard because, and that's what's really funny, right? People were irate. They were just like, how dare you demand such infallible things, and you guys are just irresponsible. And we were just like, our demands are the ones that they got submitted in 1969. Other than changing some of the language and updating the dates, we really didn't do much because we already had a framework from activists on campus, and one of which, Dr. Michael Milton, who's now the interim president for the university, who was a part of making the 1969 demands. So it's interesting to have that response of people. People thought we were just uneducated and irresponsible students who were just demanding too much. We were like, all we did was update the names on the form from the 1969 demands, as well as incorporating some of the work that was done during the anti-apartheid protests that were happening on campus at Mizzou. So our work has always been informed by this idea of Sankofa, always going back to the past, but also just understand we live, work, and build off the shoulders of giants and our ancestors who have come before us. And so that's what it really is about, of being informed by that work, trying to take this feminist, this intersectional lens to the work that we're doing, and that's how we update the language and what you see right now. And also there's an aspect of demands that to a certain extent are supposed to be unreasonable. Because if I ask for $1 million and I only need 20,000, it's a lot easier to negotiate to that 20,000. But that's also like my business background, things like that. So I think do we keep skipping you? Yeah, okay, let's quit.
Two questions. You can choose the one you want to answer. How did you choose hunger strike as opposed to a different tactic when it was time to escalate? Or what was it like when the football team began to support you and the televised football team or televised games potentially getting canceled? How that sort of fed the flames of what was occurring?
I'm gonna answer both because they're both good questions. Hunger strike. It's a very simple answer. Looking at what we have done in terms of tactics, right? We had started to exhaust the list of tactics that we have learned from the research and in the history, civil rights movement, other things that we've looked at, and so there was kind of a slight lull in terms of the inspiration to come up with like new and innovative things. So there was a list of things that we already had strategically planned to do, but there's also this idea of going back to what you're saying, capacity. So we're trying to figure out, like, it was midterms, like we were like, we got stuff, we can't be meeting at 2 a.m. tonight, like, Jonathan, let's go home. So we had those conversations, but for me, it really came down to the political agendas that have been pushed behind the history of hunger strikes and understanding why they've been used. And it's really, you can go down to the theories, but it really boils down to this idea of equating the struggle that you're fighting for with humanity. And that's what I had to do. And I was willing to risk my life because I believe in the cause of fighting inequalities deeply. And showing that, like, I'm willing to risk my life should show you how serious you should be taking us. That we shouldn't have gotten to a hunger strike. We shouldn't have gotten to the homecoming demonstration. You should have been listening to us since, like, we were putting forth requests from years and years ago. But we just didn't have the leadership at the university who was willing to have those conversations. Or we did have administrators who were willing to listen to us and try and help us out, but they reported to other individuals who exert more power than they do. So even they were kind of silenced in the way that they can help students. So it really came down to showing that, this is serious and you need to take it seriously. In terms of football players, they came in, it was a 7-day hunger strike. They came in day like 5. So it was kind of towards the end. Their help was invaluable, and it really harped on this idea of economic justice and really getting to the core of capitalism, because that's what they respond to. I tell people all the time that I would be dead if the football players didn't step in. So I am definitely grateful. That's informed by lived experience that's informed by like history. It's also informed by conversation that I'll detail in my autobiography whenever I put that out. That I had with a certain individual at the university who's no longer at the university, who explicitly told me to my face that I don't care what you do, but I'll let you die. And that's how serious it was. And so I knew that the institutional level didn't value my life. Like society doesn't value Black lives, right? But I knew at that point that the institution truly didn't value my life. So them stepping in and influencing on that ideal of capitalism, understanding that that's a huge core of what the university functioned off of, was huge. And it looks different for every university because not everybody has revenue generating sports. So some people, it's their scholarship, maybe it's a STEM field. So hitting on that piece of money is key in terms of the battles that we're fighting for.
I'm gonna ask Dr. Cross a question. How does his activism compare with your own, and how is it different?
Well, when I think about my own activism, I think about a movement rather than just me. So I'm finding it amazing that this is all embedded in his consciousness. He's, I can't say how powerful the 70s were. We were bourgeois, we were poor, we were from this town and so on, but we just had a sense of commitment, an epiphany that the community was bigger than the individual. And it caused you to do things that you wouldn't normally do as a single person, and that's what I'm hearing. It's refreshing because I think maybe 5 years ago I'd not given up, but I thought, okay, I'm history, so that's it. And to see how Jonathan and other people have responded has been fantastic. I don't know him well, but I can feel some of the thoughts and feelings that he must have felt at that time. You can imagine with the football team saying, no, you're not alone. I mean, that it means it won't go forever. And that's how we felt in those times. It gets dramatized by the takeovers and whatever, but I went from wanting to be an urban affairs person to a scholar of African American studies because of this sense of commitment to the community. And it sounds syrupy and wishy-washy, but when it gets into your body and your soul, that you do that, and then you spend a lifetime. You hate having to spend a lifetime. I went to undergrad here, and now I've discovered that if I was an undergrad here, it would be just as difficult to get a black education as when I was here in '63. I had reason to drive out to 8500 Colorado Boulevard, and when I crossed Hamden, I almost felt like I was in South Africa. It is so white from Hamden to a county line, and it's almost like the curriculum at the institution. It is so white that what you have to go through as a member of a targeted group to find out whose professor is teaching what is criminal. And not that I want someone to go on a starvation diet, but we still haven't figured out how to get this school to understand that it's a 21st century agenda to have ethnic studies. So I feel very privileged to be here. So.
I feel like we had the hand over here because like there's a lot of hands right. Go ahead.
So, at universities, the student turnover is pretty high, they're up to 2 or 4 years. How have you or will you create a system of sustainability so the work continues when you're no longer there?
What we've been doing now is like these education institute like training session teachings with students, right? Originally we were targeting staff and faculty, but we also kind of saw that was like using up a lot of energy to try and pursue those avenues, and they have different schedules. So we really tried to address our peers. So we've started to create spaces on campus, both physical and intellectual spaces where we're having these conversations, generally at large with our own peers, but then we're also targeting individuals who are interested in pursuing this further, because that was one of the key things that I tell people about is, institutional amnesia is extremely powerful. And what we were able to accomplish was the result of myself and as well as three other graduate students who had been at the university as undergrads. So we had seen this firsthand happen. We had seen this through two different regimes of chancellors. And so we knew that, other students on campus were like, whoa, we didn't know these policy changes had happened. We didn't know XYZ had happened. Some people in 2010 wasn't that far away, didn't even know about the Cotton Bowl incidents. And that's also partially the way that the Institute has kind of, covered that up. So we were privileged to have individuals who had seen over the time and had, superseded that institutional amnesia. So our goal right now is to really educate that next generation and get involved and show them what we know, right? And put that in a tangible format. We've seen things like, who's heard of Beyonce's Lemonade? They put together a Lemonade syllabus talking about black feminism and looking at that. We've had the Ferguson syllabus. So like these are the avenues that we're pursuing to really submit the literature and the knowledge that we have so that it can be passed on to other individuals.
So I have a question inspired with this space for you. Are you gonna still be involved in activism, or are you just gonna, what do you want to do?
What do I want to do?
5 years out.
5 years out. What am I doing 5 years? 5 years out, I'm in a doctoral program.
Here. Here.
If I get accepted. Well, I there's something I don't know going on, but I'm okay with it. I put out like 3 books by this time. I've been doing like critical scholarship, so that's the work I want to be doing. And my interest is in globalization, but really looking at the specialty of peace and conflict studies. I'm looking at human rights issues. Those are things I'm really interested in. So between now and a doctoral program, getting more experience in that field is what I want to do. Because activism is not something I do. It's part of who I am. And we kind of talked in the class yesterday about that there's this spectrum of activists, of people who just act for the camera and perform when it's convenient for them, and there's people who have activism as their identity. And for me, activism is a part of who I am, so I don't necessarily need to put it in my Twitter bio. So it's always going to inform the work that I'm doing. And so whether I'm working with like a community organization, doing something faith-based, or just being in academia, it's always going to influence the work that I'm doing.
I just want to point out that it's no accident that he's a major in higher education. Critical race theory and social justice are core pillars to our discourse. And this is why I'm pushing so heavily for ethnic studies. Ethnic studies is not just about content. It's about narrative and experience. And so if Jonathan can go back in space, his ghost is there in the 1930s, his ghost is there in the 1920s. Well, you can't make those connections unless you do a formal, serious study of the experiences of people of color. And I guess that's what's so dangerous. And what I've seen in my own lifetime is not only do we end up relishing these courses, but it turns a certain percentage of white students who become allies, and maybe that's the threat. But in answer to your question, you increase the probability of this discourse getting deeper if you actually have moments of serious study of the experience. And that's why, as students, you need to press for ethnic studies. It won't be received in that way, but that's what it's about. And it's no accident that we're here today in a program that is sponsoring critical race theory as part of the discourse. It has a spin-off effect. Are we close to, or 10 more minutes? Okay, we have 10 more minutes. Yes?
How many black students were in your undergrad body? Because here at DU, we actually don't have a lot. And when I look at a lot of the events where there are black activists here, the majority of them are either getting ready to graduate or they're grad school, so there's not a lot of undergraduate black activists here. So I was wondering, how do you think here at DU we can increase the undergrad students' engagement as well as community engagement when it comes to black issues, race issues?
Mm-hmm. Undergrad, it was 1,987. Now it's 2,217. And that's just black. So it comes out to like 6.97% of the population that we have right now. So it's PWI. What can students do? Is that more of what you're asking? What students can do?
don't see a lot of undergraduate students in the freshman and sophomore class doing anything. I mean, they want to do stuff, but they don't know how to get involved. So when actual events come up, they don't know about it and they're not seeing it.
Okay, because it sounded like you're asking two different questions. So I'll answer what I thought your question originally was in terms of like recruitment and retention of like communities of color to the school. That's not student responsibility. That should be an institutional priority, and it's up to the powers that be to enact those initiatives, like summer recruitment, how they're targeting recruitment, things like that, as well as retention efforts. Right. In terms of getting students involved in activism. There's no cookie cutter way to do it. I can't like if I'm passionate about saving the pandas, like I have a certain passion I'm connected to it because of an experience I've had. And if you don't love pandas like I do, I can't force you to love pandas. But what I can do is expose you to my love of pandas, and hopefully in that pursuit, then you can love pandas like I do. It's easier to talk about pandas for a lot of universities and institutes I go to than talking about racism, because it's a similar phenomenon that talking about racism, talking about the issue of sexual assault, because the University of Missouri, we have a reporting of 27%, and that's just those who report, because we already know the scholarship shows that most don't report sexual assault on college campuses. There are other institutes who have higher rates. They're thinking about the trans communities on college campuses. That's still growing territory. And so we have to create the spaces for these dialogues to happen. I truly believe in having interpersonal connections. And that's something that students can do, is create interactions with their peers, obviously being informed with your education and of others. But then I think it links back to having an institutional priority, because again, we're supposed to be students. We're supposed to get degrees. We're supposed to hold the university accountable, but we also have another priority of why we're here. And so we should be in spaces and an environment where they're making that a priority to be inclusive and to be equitable in their approach to all communities.
My question has to do with the last line of what you just said, Jonathan. How has institutional support shifted post all the activities from last fall? Has it shifted, and what does it look like in more practical terms, in terms of the support you're receiving from faculty and or staff?
What's your definition of shifted?
So you mentioned before, right? So before you participated in homecoming, nobody was really listening to anyone, and then they had no choice but to listen to you, right? So has that continued? Are they listening? Are they checking in? Do you get a sense that there's a sense of care, or is it business as usual? And I'd like to know what you want.
You got me. Truth. I'll put it this way. Yes. Has it shifted? Yes. The way that the Institute currently is approaching issues of social justice, issues of campus activism has shifted, and they have turned a more keen eye to what's going on with communities. Has it been strategic? Maybe not, as of late, it's getting a little bit more strategic, but there has been a lens, a light that's kind of shifted to those communities. Hypothetically, we could complicate that answer by looking at the intentions of why. So if we look at our Vice Chancellor of Finance and the initiatives that he's putting forth in terms of our new capital campaign that sprung out of all of this for $1 billion. We complicate the issues of scholars on campus who are not critical race scholars, who are now basically exploiting the experiences of students for research initiatives. Hypothetically, right? I'm just putting that out there. So I think there's the answer, but there's always ways to complicate the answer and understand. I can't always tell flat out what someone's intentions are, but you can always look at the matrix code and kind of put things together. I think I want to say you were first.
Sort of related to that question, I'm interested in your thoughts around Melissa Click and how she was, I think, symbolically kind of burned at the stake as an ally of the movement to suppress and scare faculty and staff from being engaged in these conversations around the nation. I mean, that's my perspective. I'm wondering what are your thoughts on it, your agree with that or not?
Thank you. Tough question. I like that. Melissa Click, right? Freedom of speech. A lot of things there with that. How do I approach it? I'll say yes. My perspective is that it was a symbolic burning of the stake. She was put out, hung on a cross for engaging in what Martin Luther King talks about is dangerous altruism. So as a person who is using their privilege and position to then intercede on the behalf of a marginalized identity, she did an impeccable job of standing in that space, and then also truly being an ally in the sense of a verb, and not something that is to be put on a CV, because she never asked once for the attention or spotlight. And even while everything was being pinned on her, so conveniently, she always tried to take the narrative back to the work that students have been doing, and not just Black students, but every single community on campus that have been working for that. So it's really unfortunate that's what happened, because in response to donors, especially the donors who have a lot of influence on our campus, as well as to legislation, the pressures came. And university officials, again, there's part of me who wants to be like the humanitarian and be like, well, they've never dealt with this before. Some of these people have only been there for like a couple years, and so they've never engaged with this type of environment for it. So this is their first time doing it. So do you give them leeway for not knowing how to approach it appropriately? Maybe. But then there's also just the overall institutional response of what does it mean to have academic freedom as a faculty member? What rights did she have and not have in that space? How was public opinion influenced in the decisions that were made? Were everything the headlines in terms of the influence that legislators happened, were those truly influences, or was this more of an institutional response of trying to put things together? So again, complicating the issue, but my general perspective is she engaged in dangerous altruism. She showed herself to be an ally to underrepresented students, and it's unfortunate that the cost paid was what she's had to endure and what she's still enduring in terms of public outcry. Because the same way I still get like death threats from the community members who have access to my public email. She's facing similar things as well.
Have you seen that take an effect on how people have engaged, faculty and staff have engaged or not engaged?
Absolutely. There's already a culture of fear and a culture of silence, and it's just been enhanced, unfortunately. Whereas there was a point in time where we reactivated the Black Faculty Union on campus, where there's different initiatives happening for faculty to support students. The high point was kind of like February, and since then they've kind of lost some of the momentum, just because as things have progressed with her situation, it has influenced successfully the way that people are behaving.
Great.
So, continuation of a short conversation we had last night. Taking into consideration all that you now know and have experienced, are you less or more optimistic about the ability of your institution to achieve what you set out to achieve?
I would say more optimistic, because when we look at the institution includes the body, and in the body is the social justice community, which is extremely strong. And so we do ourselves a disservice if we're just like institution is admins and leave it at that. But when we complicate the idea of what the institution is and who are the stakeholders and the constituents of that body, we have to include the students who are doing the work. So absolutely, because the community on campus has been mobilized how it's never been mobilized before. I still don't know why it happened, but every Muslim students, Jewish students, LGBTQ, different ability statuses, it truly it's been on fire, and it's still on fire. And so those individuals who have now become more politically educated, who become aware of our circumstance, and fighting for those issues, is definitely encouraging. Absolutely, and it's informing the way that faculty, staff, and also admins react, because as the ones paying tuition, we do have a say in the process. So.
I think I saw two more hands with two more questions. oh, those are their issues, but that doesn't really affect me.
So very interesting. We had some athletes come from the Caribbean area, being surrounded everything that they knew by other people of color, and so they really engaging in some of these spaces. They just didn't know because they're like, you guys are all nuts. Like, racism is a real thing. You're making this up. It's just you silly Americans. And so I think that was really interesting because being people of color and having those conversations, it really started from the perspective of trying to get them to understand what overt and covert racism looks like in real time. So one of the base conversations that we started to have on campus was creating and facilitating spaces to talk about microaggressions. It's a very entry-level point, but it opened the door for a lot more conversations for people to start understanding. It's like, okay, what is a microaggression? What does this look like in every day? And then how is this a symptom of a greater issue at hand? And so I think it's understanding your audience, understanding where they're at, and then starting with the conversation in a way that's going to be able to impact their lives. So for them, identifying microaggressions, but specifically looking at how that plays out in athletics, talking about the athletic industrial complex being $40 million slaves, all the theory that's going on with that realm, and connecting that to how they're engaging with their coaches, why their facilities, the way where they eat, sleep, and train is all physically disconnected from campus. And so we drew attentions in that area, and then they began to understand how the system works.
So I think, just from experience and I think about the realms, it's extremely difficult to have meaningful dialogues with those kind of conversations, especially when there's a lot of hate and there's a lot of hurt and there's a lot of fear attached to them from all sides. And so I guess my question is, like, what kind of tools or tactics or just like ways of being you bring to conversation and facilitating around really hard conversations with students across the board, some people who are already there and who want to have them, and students who just hate that conversation, hate the word privilege, and don't even want to touch on it because that enact so much guilt in a way. So how do you bring, you facilitate yourself and other practices that you've seen, what are really specific things that you either bring to the conversation or that you try to keep alive in those conversations?
We'll start out what to keep in mind. It's always keep in mind. It's really simple, right? But like this idea of consciousness. All right, so I'm not gonna go into the whole thing, but Larry Brown has this essay that talks about consciousness and why the theory of why fish don't know what water is. And it's a very interesting perspective on this idea that we all remotely have these routines in life, and so it's not until we're abruptly like confronted with this idea of like I'm a fish and I'm in water, and what is water? Because like I've always lived in this environment, and really waking that up. So for me, there's going to be an aspect of confrontation no matter what you do. That doesn't mean you fight people or like oppress people or like, you know, try to instigate incidences, but understand that there's going to be some disagreement and dissension. And so what we kind of did is like we adopted safe spaces, right? But that's kind of been appropriated, and now it's this like really like, ooh, whiny college kids, and it's this baby thing. So what we took from that is now our practice has kind of been brave spaces. So we engage in spaces that are intentionally created where people can fail. And that's what we do, is that we bring together, and it's been mainly with peers, right? Because the conversation shifts when we try to have student to faculty, student to admin conversation. But we've done it with our peers and started with people that we know and really had these what we call brave spaces where literally we just have time for people to air it out. It's just like, you know what, I think all black people are faking it. There's no such thing as oppression. And then talking about whiteness or talking about, you know, anti-blackness in the Latino community. So we have these conversations, and then from that we try and always pull and have outcome based, right? So we always try and have like a goal at the end. So at the end of this conversation, we're going to introduce the concept of XYZ. And so being intentional has to be a part of this dialogue. Obviously, like I said before, you have to have love, you have to have hope, you have to approach people with a certain aura in terms of understanding that no one's perfect, but you also have to engage, because confrontation breeds growth, and a part of that confrontation has to be with people who don't believe, look, identify as you do. And that's how we become more globally aware of our community, and that's how we start to love on each other. because you don't love all your family members like in like, you know, buddy ways, but you still love all your family members to an extent because they're family. And I think that's the kind of model that we have to take forth in terms of the conversations.
So I wonder if there's anything either of you would like to say in conclusion.
I just want to say thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
So I just want to thank Mr. Butler and Dr. Cross again for, I won't call it an inspiring conversation because I think that trivializes it. It was important and necessary, and I hope that it will continue on our campus throughout the rest of this year, over the summer, and into next year, about how we can all intentionally take ownership of systems of oppression that exist on this campus and think about what is our role in dismantling those systems. So I have one piece of shameless commerce. You should have received or seen the flyer coming in for our public policy event happening in a week. Dr. Sponsor, do you want to say anything about that event?
Please come. First afternoon, 5:30, and the program will start at 6.
And we'll be talking about the college completion agenda, and I hope you all will plant questions that continue this conversation and how it connects to the college completion agenda. And I also want to thank our sponsors, again, our co-sponsors, the community, the Center for Community Engagement and Service Learning, the Latino Center for Scholarship and Community Engagement, and then the Mortgage Academic departments that helped us out. So thank you to them, and thank you again to Dr. Cross and Mr. Butler.
Take care of yourself.